We stood at the entrance to the Alpha Prime's lair, the pulsing cocoons of its brood casting an eerie, sickly light across the bone-strewn chamber. Rendell's face was a mask of grim determination as he checked the load on his ancient rifle, the silver bullets glinting dully in the moonlight. "The hour is upon us," he intoned, his voice a low, rasping growl. "The Alpha Prime will be at the height of its power, drunk on the dark energies of the Hunger Moon. We must strike now, before it is too late." I nodded, my grip tightening on the hilt of my silver blade. The metal was warm to the touch, almost as if it sensed the impending battle and yearned to taste the flesh of our foes. We stepped into the chamber, the bones of the Alpha Prime's victims crunching beneath our feet like a macabre carpet. And then, from the depths of the shadows, it emerged. The Alpha Prime was a behemoth, towering over us like a living mountain of muscle and fur. Its eyes blazed with a feral, savage intelligence, its muzzle drawn back in a snarl that revealed rows of jagged, yellowed fangs. The beast's hide was a patchwork of scars and matted fur, a testament to the countless battles it had fought and won over the centuries. Behind it, the cocoons pulsed and writhed, the monstrous shapes within straining against their fleshy prisons. I could feel the hunger radiating from them, a raw, primal need to rend and devour and destroy. Rendell let out a bellowing war cry and charged, his rifle spitting silver fire. The Alpha Prime roared in answer, the sound shaking the very foundations of the cave. It lashed out with a massive taloned paw, sending Rendell flying backwards into the wall with a sickening crunch. I leapt forward, my blade flashing in the crimson light of the Hunger Moon. The Alpha Prime met my charge with a swipe of its massive claws, the razor-sharp talons screeching against the blessed metal of my sword. I ducked and wove, my heart pounding in my chest, as I sought an opening in the beast's defenses. All around us, the cocoons began to rupture, spilling forth a tide of newborn horrors. They were twisted parodies of the werewolves we had faced before, their bodies warped and mutated by the dark energies that had spawned them. They came at us in a wave of tooth and claw, their cries an unholy cacophony that threatened to shatter my sanity. I fought like a man possessed, my blade singing through the air as I hacked and slashed at the oncoming horde. Beside me, Rendell had regained his feet, his rifle and blade taking a fearsome toll on the Alpha Prime's brood. But for every monstrosity we cut down, two more seemed to take its place, an endless tide of hunger and fury that threatened to overwhelm us. The chamber was awash with blood and viscera, the stench of death and corruption hanging thick in the air. And at the center of it all, the Alpha Prime raged, its massive bulk shrugging off the sting of our silver weapons like they were little more than pinpricks. Its eyes blazed with a savage, triumphant light, as if it knew that victory was within its grasp. I felt my strength beginning to wane, my arms growing leaden with fatigue. The wounds I had suffered in previous battles reopened, spilling hot blood down my skin. Beside me, Rendell staggered, his face ashen beneath the blood and grime. But still, we fought on, driven by a desperate, unyielding determination to see this nightmare end. For we knew that if we fell here, in this fetid pit of darkness and despair, there would be no one left to stop the Alpha Prime's reign of terror. With a last, desperate surge of strength, I lunged forward, my blade aimed at the Alpha Prime's heart. The beast met my charge with a roar of fury, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from my face. I twisted, using the creature's own momentum against it, and drove my sword deep into its chest. The Alpha Prime let out a shuddering howl, its eyes going wide with shock and pain. But instead of falling, the beast wrenched itself free from my blade, a gout of steaming black blood splattering across the ground. It staggered back, its chest heaving, but its eyes still blazed with unholy rage. I braced myself for another attack, but the Alpha Prime had other plans. With a thunderous roar, it turned and fled, disappearing into the depths of the tunnels. The newborn horrors, as if sensing their master's retreat, scattered like leaves before a gale, their cries echoing through the chamber. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the ragged sound of our own breathing. Rendell limped to my side, his face a mask of exhaustion and grim determination. "It's not over," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the distant howls of the retreating werewolves. I nodded, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The Alpha Prime would return, stronger and more vicious than ever, and when it did, we would need to be ready. As we turned to leave the chamber, a sudden, gut-wrenching scream pierced the air. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat, to see Rendell impaled on the claws of one of the newborn horrors. The beast had caught him from behind, its wicked curved talons punching through his chest in a spray of crimson. The beast snarled, wrenching its claws free from Rendell's body with a sickening, wet sound. It turned to face me, its eyes blazing with a feral, hungering light. I met its charge with a cry of rage and despair, my blade carving a deep, sizzling gash across its chest. The creature howled in pain, staggering back, but I pressed my attack, driving it away from his fallen form. With a final, desperate thrust, I buried my sword to the hilt in the beast's throat, watching as the life faded from its eyes. I turned, stumbling back to where he lay, my heart hammering in my chest. He was still alive, but barely, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the ground a deep, glistening crimson. "Jonah," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant howls of the retreating werewolves. "You have to keep going. Don't let this be for nothing." I bowed my head, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders like a physical thing. I knew he was right. I knew that I had to keep going, no matter the cost. But in that moment, as I knelt there beside him, watching the life fade from his eyes, I couldn't help but feel that the cost was already too high. With a final, shuddering breath, Rendell stilled, his eyes staring sightlessly up at the cavern ceiling. I rose to my feet, my body aching with a weariness that went beyond the physical. I looked around the chamber, at the piles of bones and the shattered cocoons, and I knew that this was just the beginning. The Alpha Prime was still out there, wounded but alive, and it would stop at nothing to see its dark purpose fulfilled. And now, with Rendell gone, I was the only one left to stand against it. But as I turned to leave the chamber, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a sound that I had heard before, in the depths of my darkest nightmares. The sound of claws on stone, of a hungry growl echoing through the tunnels. The sound of the Alpha Prime, returning to finish what it had started. The world exploded into a cacophony of snarls and howls as the Alpha Prime's pack surged forward. The first beast lunged at me, its yellow fangs bared in a vicious snarl. I sidestepped, bringing my blade down in a vicious arc that severed the creature's forelimb at the elbow. Dark blood sprayed across the stone floor as the werewolf howled in agony, its cry cut short as I buried my sword in its throat. But there was no time to savor the small victory. The pack was upon me, a whirlwind of fur and fang that threatened to overwhelm me at any moment. I fought like a man possessed, my blade carving through flesh and bone with sickening ease. A set of jaws clamped down on my shoulder, razor teeth grinding against the leather of my armor. I roared in pain and rage, driving my elbow into the beast's snout with a satisfying crunch. As it reeled back, I spun, my blade taking it across the chest in a spray of crimson. The battle seemed to stretch on for an eternity, a never-ending dance of death and gore. I lost count of the number of beasts I felled, their bodies piling up around me in a grotesque heap of shredded flesh and splintered bone. I could feel my strength continuing to wane, my arms growing leaden with each swing of my blade. Blood ran into my eyes from a gash on my forehead, blurring my vision and making the world swim before me. Just as I thought I could fight no more, I caught a glimpse of an opening in the cavern wall, a narrow fissure that seemed to lead deeper into the mountain. With a burst of desperate energy, I fought my way towards it, hacking and slashing at the snarling wall of fur that barred my path. I stumbled into the fissure just as a set of claws raked down my back, tearing through my armor like parchment. I bit back a scream, forcing myself to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and the pack as possible. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear the scrabble of claws on stone behind me, the panting breaths of the beasts that pursued me relentlessly. And then, up ahead I saw it, a glimmer of light, filtering through a crack in the mountainside. I hurled myself towards it, my lungs burning, my legs trembling with exhaustion, but as I neared the exit, a group of the newborn monstrosities, their bodies twisted and deformed, blocked my path. They leered at me with hungry eyes, their jaws dripping with viscous drool. I didn't hesitate. With a roar of fury, I charged forward, my blade leading the way. I hacked and slashed with abandon, severing limbs and splitting skulls with each frenzied blow. The creatures fought back with a savage ferocity, their claws rending flesh from bone, their teeth snapping inches from my face. One of the beasts managed to catch me across the thigh, its claws cutting deep into the muscle. I stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to catch myself against the wall. With a snarl of pain and defiance, I brought my blade down on the creature's neck, watching as its head tumbled from its shoulders in a geyser of black blood. Suddenly, I was through. I burst from the mountain, collapsing to my knees, gasping for breath, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and pain. But as my vision cleared, I realized that something was terribly wrong. The world outside the mountain had changed. The once familiar landscape now twisted and warped beyond recognition. The hunger moon hung low in the sky, its baleful light casting a sickly pallor across the land. In the distance, I could see the shapes of villages and towns, but they were wrong, their buildings sagging and distorted like something out of a fever dream. And everywhere, the howls of the werewolves echoed, a chilling chorus that sent shivers down my spine. I realized then the true extent of the Alpha Prime's power, the horrifying reach of its influence. The nightmare was far from over. In fact, I feared it had only just begun. As I stumbled through the twisted landscape, I began to notice signs of the werewolf plague's devastating impact. Fields that had once been lush and green were now blackened and dead, the crops withered and rotting on the vine. The carcasses of livestock littered the ground, their bodies torn asunder by ravenous claws and fangs. But it was the villages that truly drove home the horror of what had happened. The first one I encountered was little more than a smoldering ruin, the buildings reduced to piles of charred timber and ash. The streets were choked with corpses, their bodies ripped and mangled beyond recognition. I picked my way through the carnage, trying not to look too closely at the faces of the dead. Men, women, children. No one had been spared the werewolves' fury. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of smoke and the coppery scent of blood. As I neared the center of the village, I heard a sound that made my heart stop in my chest. A low, keening wail, full of anguish and despair. I followed the sound to a collapsed hovel, where I found a woman cradling the mangled body of a child, her face streaked with blood and tears. She looked up at me with haunted eyes, her voice little more than a broken whisper. "They came in the night," she said. "Tore through the village like a pack of rabid beasts. I tried to protect my little one, but—" Her words dissolved into wrenching sobs, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. I knelt beside her, offering what little comfort I could, but I knew there was nothing I could say that would ease her pain. Suddenly, a howl split the air, so close it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I spun around, just in time to see a group of transformed villagers stalking out of the shadows, their eyes glowing with a feral, hungry light. They were a horrific sight, their bodies twisted and deformed by the curse that flowed through their veins. Some still wore the tattered remnants of their human clothing, while others were naked, their skin covered in patches of coarse, dark fur. I drew my blade, preparing myself for the fight to come. The transformed villagers circled me, snarling and snapping, their claws flexing with murderous intent. The first one lunged, its jaws gaping wide. I met it with a slash of my blade, the silver edge biting deep into its neck. The creature howled in agony, black blood gushing from the wound, but it kept coming, its claws raking across my chest. I staggered back, pain exploding through my body. Another villager leapt at me, its teeth sinking into my shoulder. I roared in fury and pain, driving my blade up through the bottom of its jaw and into its brain. By the time the last one fell, I was drenched in blood, my armor hanging off me in tatters. I stumbled away from the carnage, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my vision swimming with exhaustion. But even as I fled into the night, I knew that this was only the beginning. The Alpha Prime's power was growing with each passing moment, and its army of werewolves was becoming more powerful and organized by the day. If I didn't find a way to stop it soon, I feared that the entire world would fall to the Hunger Moon's curse, and the werewolf plague would consume everything in its path. As I fled, my mind raced with the realization of what I had to do. The Alpha Prime was the key to everything. I thought back to the stories Rendell had told me, the ancient legends of the Alpha Prime's origins. He had spoken of a great city, a bastion of human civilization that had stood for centuries against the darkness. If there was any hope of finding a way to defeat the beast, I knew it would be there. I set my course for the city, using the stars to guide my way. The journey was a nightmare of blood and terror, as I fought my way through hordes of transformed animals and maddened survivors. The curse had spread far beyond the human populace, infecting every living thing in its path. I saw wolves the size of horses, their fur matted with blood and gore, their eyes blazing with a feral hunger. I watched as bears, their bodies twisted and deformed by the curse, tore through their own kind with a savagery that defied belief. And I fought against birds of prey, their talons and beaks transformed into razor-sharp weapons, their screams echoing through the night like the cries of the damned. Each battle left me weaker than the last, my body battered and bleeding, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. But still, I pushed on, driven by a desperate need to reach the city before the Alpha Prime and its pack. I knew I was close to the city when I heard the sounds of battle in the distance, the clash of steel against claw, the screams of the dying mingling with the roars of the beasts. I quickened my pace, my heart hammering in my chest, my hand tight around the hilt of my silver blade. As I crested a hill, I finally saw it. The city, its walls looming high against the blood-red sky. But even from a distance, I could tell that something was terribly wrong. The gates hung off their hinges, twisted and bent as if by some great force. Smoke rose from within the walls, and the stench was overwhelming. As I neared the gates, I saw the full extent of the horror that had befallen the city. The streets were choked with bodies, some human, some werewolf, all of them ripped and torn beyond recognition. The buildings were smashed and broken, their walls splashed with gore, their windows gaping like sightless eyes. And in the center of it all, standing atop a mound of corpses, was the Alpha Prime. The beast was even larger than I remembered, its body rippling with muscle, its fur matted with the blood of its victims. Its eyes blazed with a savage, triumphant light, and its jaws dripped with gore. Around it, the remnants of its pack fought against a small, desperately outnumbered group of human defenders. They were a ragtag bunch, armed with whatever weapons they could find, but they fought with a fierce determination, their eyes bright with the knowledge that they were the last line of defense between the werewolves and the rest of humanity. I charged into the fray, hacking and slashing with a savage fury, my mind consumed with the need to reach the Alpha Prime, to end this nightmare once and for all. But even as I fought, I knew that I was too late. The city was already lost, its people slaughtered, its walls breached. As I looked around at the chaos and carnage, the broken bodies and shattered lives, I felt a sense of hopelessness wash over me. How could I possibly hope to defeat a creature of such raw, primal power? How could I save a world that was already teetering on the brink of annihilation? But then I remembered Rendell's words, the last thing he had said to me before he died. "You're the only one who can stop this," he had whispered, "the only one who can end the nightmare." And so, with a roar of defiance and rage, I turned to face the Alpha Prime, my silver blade held high. I would fight, even if it meant my own death. I would fight, because there was no other choice, for the sake of the world, For the sake of all that I held dear, I would fight.